But there's a lot of emotion around mergers and acquisitions, right? And people like it or they don't like it. And actually, some of the guys that they wouldn't like are actually up here at the table with me, as a matter of fact. So, and I'm doing a panel tomorrow morning talking about sort of the good, bad, ugly in terms of practices. But is this a tendency that's going to continue in this industry? Is it going to get worse? Is it going to get, I mean, what go out 5 years? Are all the companies are going to be acquired and it's all done and people don't talk about it anymore? What's going to happen? Best guess.
I think consolidation is a reality in any industry. And ours, you know, perhaps it's a little bit behind. You and I talked prior to the panel about the industrial distribution industry, which went through this cycle 20 years ago and went from thousands of fragmented distributors to a couple hundred, and the concentration of share moved very much to the top 20, 30 companies in that space, and a lot of that through consolidation. It's just a reality that we have to contend with. I think you know, the response to it probably varies depending on the strategy of the company. There are probably a lot of companies represented in the room who are on the smaller end of the spectrum in terms of revenue, who see that as a great exit strategy for them. And so perhaps it's a really positive thing. Certainly from my perspective and perhaps my peers on the stage, it's a necessity in our business. You know, you at one point earlier, Mike, you touched on Annixter's recent acquisition, probably our two last big acquisitions, as being disruptive. And while, you know, we hope that we execute in a way that they will be disruptive, certainly to our competitive peers, our intention wasn't to disrupt. Our intention was to react to disruption. That was a strategic move because of changes that were negatively affecting our business, and we needed to make a big step in a particular direction around product relevance and solution relevance that we just felt we could not organically grow into fast enough. And so it was our response to disruption. And so when you put all those factors together, I think it's a reality, and for many companies it'll be a really great thing. And for some who maybe have gotten caught flat-footed by it, it'll be a bad thing. But if I were a small company looking at it and my interests were invest in my business long term, execute a strategy consistently, as many good small companies in this industry are doing, and they're agile, as we touched on earlier, I probably wouldn't give it a second thought.
Brian, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, there are numbers that are tracked on this in terms of the consolidation, and so there's no question that the industry is consolidating. You know, my company Sonopar wasn't in this market in 1995, and today.
Really?
No, it wasn't in 1995.
It started in 95?
No, it started in first acquisition was in 1998.
Wow.
So many acquisitions later, you know, we've got a leading position in the industry. But what is, and we're interested in doing more. For anybody out there, just I just paid for my plane ticket.
That was an invitation, but make him buy the beer.
But what always strikes me is actually how slow the number is moving, because they publish the concentration of the top 10 players, and I guess we've seen it go from 20-something to kind of 30-something. So there's no question there is consolidation going on, but there is also a lot of new firms being launched all the time, and I think it's really the nature of our business that some bright, talented people with a little bit of money can do some great things and provide local services, technical expertise, a lot of hustle, and that we have manufacturers where things still are widely distributed. And I come from an industry where there was the APR concept, where right. Things were a little bit more locked down, and in that industry, the HVAC industry, I think they're really down to like 6 major players. Yeah. I think the nature of our business lends itself to a lot more fragmentation still today. I think where I'm seeing a trend is that people are looking at the demographic challenge, which is, they talk about millennials becoming 50% of the population by the year 2020. So, that's 3 or 4 years away. How many people were born before Reagan was president? I would say that we're at like 80% or something like that. We have a huge demographic shift to go through, people born after 1980, and then the
I really like Terry
digitization.
Truman.
Huh?
I really like Terry Truman.
You're in yet another demographic. So, the costs of really embracing the digital change are considerable, and I think that will lead to more concentration. I think that's just a fact of life, that people are going to want to do things on their cell phone. They can pre-order a coffee or a meal or get information quickly. And we're going to owe it to our customers, and to be successful in the future, it's going to have to be that easy in terms of product availability. Where is my package, which is something that's done today in the industry. Text messages that your product is ready at will call, because the costs of labor in the contracting business, that's what they're thinking about, and making that much more efficient. And we've got to bring those solutions. So I think that's going to lead to more consolidation.
It's interesting you mentioned, because it does seem to not go as fast as you would have thought, and the natural evolution is that there'd be quicker consolidation, and clearly technology, I think, is going to speed that up because of the ability to invest in it, and we're interested too, by the way. So, but this idea of exiting.
By the way, there's a thing called the Pillsbury Bake Off. Just saying.
There's this. Well, we have our business development gentleman in the audience. I have to help him out. But what's slowed it, I think, in the industry is scale has not been that much of an advantage in the wholesale electrical business. It's
But I think
and you go back to the pricing. It's because of that the small local independent. It's compared against one of us in that city, not against us globally or nationally.
But the cost to build out those platforms, and you know that well
Yes,
through
absolutely.
your experience, is that piece is scalable. So I think
Yeah.
there's a new dynamic
I
that's
think
coming
you're
to the
right.
industry, and so you got to be local. You've got to continue to have those relationships, but the back end piece, if you can move it across more geographies, then it starts to make sense.
I think they're interested too. So
Yeah, well, the other aspect we don't, the other thing we don't talk about so much is the amount of consolidation that's, if you're maybe not so much in the residential, light commercial construction markets, less a percentage of our business, admittedly, but in the sort of moderate commercial, heavy commercial, industrial, there is a lot of consolidation happening in the customer base. And I don't know that you can walk into a customer at the senior level today and have a conversation that doesn't include, especially if you're with procurement people in that customer, it doesn't include the term supplier consolidation. And so they want to buy more from fewer companies, and they want to be able to have consistent execution no matter where they execute. So now all of a sudden, if you're a Houston-based company and you made a living in the oil and gas sector, life's pretty miserable for the last year or so.
I'm chairman of a company that's living that right now.
So you
it's a
know.
religious experience.
And life's miserable for you as a distributor, and it's miserable for the customers there too. So all of a sudden, that contractor says, you know what, I'm going to have to invest, but I'm going to start doing business in the Northeast, and I'm going to start going after business in the Pacific Northwest or in other places, or maybe they're going to go into another country. The suppliers they have who can follow them to those places are the suppliers who are going to win. And not just have a location there with a local presence, but the suppliers who can go there with one operating platform so that they deliver consistently, one mission and assortment of products that's consistent. And it's very, very difficult and expensive to grow your way into that if you're in our space. One of the better ways to go after that and follow those customers is to acquire. You can chase them, but once they're gone, you may not have much of a business left. And so that consolidation, I think, forces companies like ours to look at how do we consolidate so that we cover more geography. And for those key accounts, who for some drive a big portion of the revenue, you're there. Strategically, you're the most important partner they have.
I want to add something to what Chris said, and then I'm going to ask Brian to explain. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And when you look at consolidation in general, what happens, markets align by size. Large companies buy from large suppliers, small companies buy from small suppliers, and markets actually will align themselves horizontally. We're a small boutique firm. No, General Motors is never going to hire us. They're going to hire Bain and McKenzie and Accenture and those guys. So the contractor part if you look at our customer base and going to what Chris said, in terms of the light commercial and the residential, that's still a highly fragmented business, but there are major changes in the other parts. And I'd like to, could you share a little bit about what actually happened? Because it was, a lot of that was customers consolidation that triggered it.
Yes, yeah. So what Mike's referring to is in the electronics distribution industry, take the North America market. By the way, this is something I've thought a lot about, because when you look at the U.S. market for electrical distribution and you compare it even to Canada, but to France and some of the other countries, it's a unique and interesting model. So in Canada, the top two players are roughly 50% of the ED market. In France, the top two players are north of 60%, close to 70%, maybe more than 70%. And so both big countries, both pretty sophisticated, not developing countries, and very interesting dynamics. But Bill hit on this point of economies of scale. I mean, the more that economies of scale play in the service delivery model to the customer, the more likely that consolidation takes place. But Mike's question was, so what happened in the electronics industry? So I joined the electronics industry a little more than 30 years ago. In the U.S. market, the top 10 players looked a lot like the electrical distribution. So the top 10 were south of 40%, for sure, south of 40%. If you look at the market today, the top two players look like the France electrical market. So the top two players are north of 70% of the share of the market. So in that industry, economies of scale are very, very important. And I saw three things happen. One is the suppliers consolidated, technology was shared, and big suppliers got bigger. And suppliers began to demand from their distribution channel services and capabilities, a little bit what Halsey was talking about, that some of the locals and regionals, really for cost reasons, not capability reasons, but were finding difficult to match. The customers began to consolidate, and they got bigger. And they began to ask for solutions and services that cut across distributors' predefined geographies. And so if you were in the east part of the United States and your largest customer said, oh, by the way, I just acquired somebody on the West Coast, you have to service that model, it's much more difficult to put a greenfield on the West Coast in an industry that's been around for 20 or 30 years. And then the final piece is what's happened and is happening in our industry is the transparency of pricing, internet, Asian competitors, and a real phenomena happened. The specmanship of the product, the design-in, where the design was taking place, became disconnected from where the production was happening. And so in the traditional distribution model, if we spec in the lighting in this room, and we typically provide it to the contractor, and our reward is the gross margin on the lighting that we provide, and it's not in the charging a fee for the specmanship. Well, in the electronics industry, it not only got disconnected between states, it got disconnected between continents. So the design-in was happening in the United States, and the production was in Shenzhen, China. And so as a result, it became much more difficult for a local US-only distributor to survive. Even those that were big in the US ran as fast as they could to partner or acquire through associations, through acquisitions, to get a footprint in Europe and in Asia. And as a result, today in that industry, 65% of the consumption of electronics is in Asia, and the balance is split between North America, Europe, and Japan. And there are some very large global players that play in electronics.
Well, if you think about industries also that have come to the U.S. aggressively over the last 5 years, I was reading, and we've been involved in a big way in some of these projects, but the fastest growing heavy industry in the United States over the last 5 years is actually fertilizer production. on a growth rate basis, fertilizer production. There hadn't been a fertilizer production plant of any size built in the United States for over 15 years, and there are 4 that I think have been built in the last 5 and 7 more that are in permitting. And these are $4, $5, $6 billion projects for the electrical contractors and the electrical distributors where these places are being built, a lot of business. And you look at these companies, the technology is mostly European. So all the engineering is done in Europe. They want to transact, partially in the United States, partially in Europe so that they can hedge currency as part of the process. But they want their purchase orders to be in Italian, so they have to be entered in Italian. Half are going to be billed in euros, the other half billed in US dollars. And if you don't have one operating system and you don't have the ability to deal with multiple currencies, multiple languages, you don't participate. And that's an industry that will generate, let's just say that our products are 10% of the build cost of one of these plants, something like $2 billion of revenue over the next 2 to 3 years that many will be excluded from because they don't have that. And to Brian's point, you can't organically grow into that, and you can't respond fast enough. And so those are the kinds of things I think will continue to drive a lot of consolidation in our business as liquefied natural gas, which is the feedstock for that industry, brought it back, and there will be some different version of that 5 years from now.
I'd like to add something, because I predated Brian, but I came out of that industry as well. And what happens, there are still small distributors in that industry. But here's what happens. Their product available market is much smaller. And because if you're a small lifestyle business, you don't need the financial returns of a professionally managed company where you have investors looking for an appropriate return. You got enough you can feed the family. And so there's still a lot of people that do remarketing and obsolete products, and there's a lot of folks that can still make money. But here's what happens. If you go back and look at this industry, when I got into it back in the late 80s, you could be a single location and you service a geography, and some of your customers might be plants of Fortune 100 companies. And they're there, and that salesman has a relationship, and you're managing that business, and what happens, all of a sudden, somebody does some great big integrated supply, intergalactic, technology thing, and that plant disappears. And so the product available market that you have as a lifestyle business shrinks. The businesses are still there, but if you think about it, they become non-investable. In other words, if you weren't already in it, nobody would go put their money in to go create a business like that, and you get stuck. You get stuck.
To add to that point, in electronics and in electrical too, there's very easy ways, and you small players know it, to compete with the large, global player, and those niche businesses in electronics are doing quite nicely today. There's not as many as there was 20 years ago, and many of those players are quite happy to be in the business, and those two major players in the U.S. are out trying to buy them, of course, but they run quite nice. It never stops. It never stops. There's always a seam. There's a seam in that customer value proposition delivery model that someone, if it's not being filled well, someone will come in and fill it.